All right, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan is only the latest move in the ongoing great power chess game for control of the Middle East. There is arguably no region of the globe as important to our interest and probably central to to world history. And as turbulent, it's like the whole world is focused on that region of the world. Award-winning author Joel Rosenberg, who holds dual American and Israeli citizenship, has led a number of delegations of American evangelicals to meet with top government leaders in Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Now, he records those experiences and analyzes those in light of recent events in a new book released earlier this month, Enemies and Allies, An Unforgettable Journey Inside the Fast-Moving and Immensely Turbulent Modern Middle East. And he joins me now in studio. Joel, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Tony, especially since you were a big part of those delegations and you're a key part of the book.
Well, Enemies and Allies. The trips were fascinating, but the book even more so as it looks at that inside information. And you've talked about how people write about the Middle East, they write about these leaders, but they don't actually ever talk to them. We sat down and talked with them.
We sat down and talked for hours. It'd be great if you had 15 minutes with a world leader to just try to raise one question. But these leaders invited us as evangelicals. That was unique. The Egyptians had never invited an evangelical delegation ever. The Saudis had never invited ever. The UAE ever. And others. And I think having that opportunity, some on the record, some off the record at the time, and then later they made sections of it available to us for the book. But so rarely do Christians, people who love Jesus, have a chance to talk about the challenges that Christians face in a region that has been beset with war, terror, and genocide against Christians. It was a hugely important opportunity, not just for religious freedom, though, but also discussing peace, the Iran threat, and so many other issues. And I try to pull that all together in literally the only book of its kind.
So a couple of questions. One, as we were sitting down meeting with these different leaders, and the one that probably I was most fascinated with was the UAE. Mm-hmm. We had a lengthy meeting there with the Crown Prince. And just
2 hours with Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ,
in his home.
Yeah, in his palace.
Did you anticipate writing a book as we were sitting there having those conversations?
No, as you recall, originally all these people wanted to meet off the record, very discreet, low key, don't tell anyone you're coming, which was fine because what was our objective? Our main objective was to build a long-term strategic friendship relationship so we could talk about the issues that Christians care about. We're happy to talk about anything they want to talk about, what's on their agenda, but we had an agenda. Yeah. And we agreed that it probably wouldn't be best helped by a lot of publicity. In every case, starting with Egypt, but going forward, every palace decided to make it public. And these became huge stories in the region because this stuff had never happened. The Christians had never been invited to any of these countries to meet with the top leadership except in Jordan.
Yeah, and we've had subsequent meetings, I know, together and then even separately with President El-Sisi in Egypt, which has been fascinating to watch that unfold, being there as they unveiled the Coptic church there. And
the largest church ever built in the history of the Middle East. And President Sisi said, would you come and bring a delegation to be there as I give it to the Christians of Egypt on Christmas Eve? Yeah. Now, he's a devout Muslim. And we've just never seen anything like this happen. El-Sisi's not doing everything right. There are human rights issues. He's overreaching in a number of areas, and I'm honest about that.
And we brought those things up in the meetings as well. We talked about religious freedom in the UAE. We talked about it in Jordan with King Hussein. We talked about it in Egypt. So these are not things we didn't talk about.
No. In fact, that was the main thing we talked about. But still, thinking about the fact that President El-Sisi has rebuilt every single church that had been burned down, damaged, or destroyed by the Muslim Brotherhood, that he built the largest church in the region to give it to the Christians, that he has signed a law that allows Christians to build churches.
Yeah,
in Egypt. Now, it's not exactly our version of religious
and they're
freedom,
moving a little
but it's
slow
better.
on that, because
Okay.
I've had some subsequent follow-up meetings with their ambassador in my other capacity.
We need to
at
keep
USER.
pressing these guys. It's not like
Because-
a rosy picture.
Yeah, but it is promising.
Yes.
And one of the things that, well, and then so the next question I want to go to, there's a lot to talk
There's a
about,
lot to talk about.
but a little time to do it. Subsequent to that, and this was never on the radar, at least it wasn't on mine, because I've had people say subsequent to our visit, and then all of a sudden we saw in the waning days of the Trump administration these historic peace accords with these countries, some of them the ones we went and visited with.
The key was MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, the crown prince, de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates. Because as you recall, when we sat with him, I said, listen, there's three things that we want you to know about evangelicals when it comes to peace and Israel. Number one, we love Israel. We love the Jews. You can't shake us on that. So because it's theological to us. It's not political. Two, Jesus commands us to love our neighbors. So we do love Palestinians. We do love Arabs. We do love Muslims. It's not either or. But third, we're looking, as we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, who will be the next Arab leader to make peace, even if the Palestinian leadership is not ready. And as I described in the book, you were in the room, he said, Joel, it's going to be me. We're like, what do you mean? I'm ready to make peace. And he walked us through why he was ready and the path he was hoping to take. It was off the record at that time. We were sitting on a huge headline, but we kept our word. That's a key part of being a Christian. And yet 2 years, almost to the day when he told us that, he announced with President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu that he was making peace. And his courageous decision set into motion Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, Kosovo also making these decisions. Absolutely fascinating. This is the only book that tells that story.
Yeah, a lot of backstory to that story.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to continue when we come back about the UAE, because I think, to me, that country and that interaction shows the connection between, as Christians, our ministry, mission work, and how that influences public policy and the world around us. So we're going to continue that conversation. My guest, Joel Rosenberg, author of a new book, Enemies and Allies. It's in bookstores all across the country. You can also order it online. How many books now have you written?
20.
And New York Times best-selling author. This is a nonfiction book. You're known for your fiction books, which are thrillers, which keep me up at night. This one tells the inside story of some pretty fascinating stuff that's real life.
It felt like I stepped into one of my thrillers, because normally I'm writing about, spies and all kinds of operatives and who are crisscrossing the Middle East, meeting with key leaders and strategy. And we got to go where
we had some
boldly go where a few people get to go.
And we had some interesting experiences that made us look over our shoulders a few times.
Well, once the Egyptian president put our faces on the front page of the papers, they had to provide security and a motorcade, and because suddenly we were targets, even though Egypt has come a long way, but
it's a chaotic place.
It's
fascinating.
come a long way, but yeah.
Well, I want to go back to the UAE for a minute, because we don't have a lot of time left. But first, folks can get copies of this book where?
Everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you like to buy books, including on ebook and audio, if people want to just listen to it while they're driving.
I honestly, I kind of like the Audible, the ebooks, because I listen to those Audible books. So the UAE, this is the one, and we went to a lot of different places, and I've been to Sudan, met with the new prime minister, the interim prime minister. That's an interesting situation, what's happening in Sudan. Yeah. But the UAE, the history there of Christian missionaries and the groundwork that was done a half a century ago, in large part laid the foundation for this openness for religious freedom. Again, not according to U.S. standards by any means.
But by Middle East standards, the UAE is among the best that there is now. More than 700 churches pretty freely operating. Again, not by American standards, but definitely by Middle East standards. Fascinating story. I tell it in the book because the Crown Prince told us, and we got permission then to put that on the record, which was, he said, do you realize that I was born in a missionary hospital? I'm like, sorry, no, right? So it turns out, he tells a story that there was a couple of medical missionary married couple.
From California.
From California. They're named the Kennedys. And they were going through the Gulf, and they saw the infant mortality rate because there was just so little basic health care. And they came to Sheikh Zayed, the father of the current crown prince and the founder of the modern state. And they said, listen, we're missionaries, we're Christians, we're evangelicals, we're doctors. We would like to set up a clinic for free. Could you help us just have permission to have a house, someplace to have a clinic? He said, well, my wife keeps having miscarriages. She's pregnant again. If you can help her bring this baby healthy to term, I'll give you my house. And that baby that was born, they did it by God's grace. And he's the crown prince. Yeah. And that's what he told us. And his brother, the foreign minister, also told us that story even in more detail. That's an amazing story because normally you think the term missionary in a Muslim culture or a Jewish culture would be anathema. But there was such goodwill birthed out of that birth.
And then from that, if I recall correctly.
And almost nobody knows that story.
If I recall correctly, from that, the first shipment of oil that they sold from the UAE, part of the profits went to build a hospital.
That may be. I don't know. I'm actually even invited to. They're having the 60th anniversary of that hospital. I think it is this November. And I'm going.
I remember that. Maybe it was a sideline conversation I had while we were there. But the revenues from that
I didn't remember that. Okay, maybe I didn't.
Funded that initial hospital.
Well, it's become a huge hospital, and it's still run by evangelicals today. I had dinner a few months ago in Dubai with the board, and they've invited me to come back. Look, Christians have always been thought of in the region as the problem. There's a tectonic shift of thinking going on where Jews and Christians and Israel were all considered the enemy.
Right.
And this is not the case currently. People see Iran as the main enemy, rightly so. But I cite in the book, Tony, that I had given a speech that you invited me to give 4 years ago, I think, at the Values Voter Summit, that there was this massive shift going on, that people were fundamentally reassessing in the Arab world, who is my friend and who is my foe? And they used to thought Israel was the enemy, the Christians were the enemy, and that is a sweeping change. Now, the darkness is falling. Iran is dangerously close to nuclear weapons. I describe that in the book as well. But it's interesting in the book because it's the only book where you sit in the Oval Office with Trump, you sit with Pompeo, you sit with Pence, and you sit with all of these Arab and Israeli leaders at the top. Whether you agree with them or not, you're hearing directly what do they think? Who are my friends? Who are my foes? Who are my enemies? Who are the allies? This is the book that Bob Woodward should have written. But anyway, amazing that God would open this door for evangelicals, and we need to keep going down this road and keep pressing for religious freedom, human rights, and peace.
And again, to me, it's this convergence of all aspects of being a believer, the compassion of missions, of this. Who would have thought that this missionary couple, doctors, went to the UAE, helped give birth to now who is the crown prince, who then set the stage for this historic peace accord with Israel.
And they had never invited Christians to come and meet with them until us. So God was tying together a bow. It was very interesting.
It's a huge shift in the geopolitical world in the Middle East. And it goes back to a Christian missionary couple.
Love, prayer, and the scriptures. Amen.
Isn't it how
they were standing firm?
It all comes together as believers. Joel Rosenberg, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for stopping by today.
Great to be here, Tony. Thank you.
And folks, I want to encourage you to pick up a copy, Enemies and Allies, and see what I had to say in the book. Joel quotes me, he says, extensively. Joel, great to be with you.